Okay, the next big issue that came up, the reason that this is on the list is because it's one of the topics that we received the most number of comments about. So it's why it's here. This is something that Council has recently addressed within the Land Development Code, and we brought those standards straight over into CodeSMTX. We did get a lot of comments, so we wanted to bring it up here and have another opportunity for a discussion. Part of the reason is that one of the things, and we even talked about it as we went through and talked about the new material standards that are in the LDC, is that right now we have a very use-based code. We don't talk about the scale of buildings. And so we have the opportunity now to potentially go back and look at those standards to see if we want to do different types of things for different scale of buildings. So here are some of the things that we heard. We heard that material standards are most effective for buildings that are much taller and much bigger. So a building that's over 3 or 4 stories, once you get that mass of building, looking at the types of standards is pretty important, or becomes more important. Smaller commercial buildings, so you think about the types of things like the coffee shops or the smaller buildings that are already within our neighborhoods, and typically we want those to look like the houses and the neighborhoods that are around them. That's part of what we're wanting to get out of that building type, and so requiring full masonry can sometimes be counterproductive to that. So you think about our Joe's Cafe, or you know, some of those other smaller commercial places that are adjacent to neighborhoods, or in those types of settings, smaller buildings again. Also being able, and those are things that we are able to address now under CodeSMTX that we weren't able to address before. Before we had commercial zoning, and it didn't matter if you were a huge commercial building or a little tiny coffee shop. If you were a restaurant like Chili's, or a restaurant like, you know, like a small coffee shop. So before it didn't matter. Those were all, like Root Cellar. Those were all different commercial zoning. It didn't matter about the scale. Now we get to talk about scale, so we want to look at maybe potentially re-looking at those material standards. So those are a lot of what we talked about. There are two, so those are sort of two types of times. The other types of time that you want to look at material standards, and material standards become important, is if you already have a traditional style within an area. You know, there are cities across the nation, like if you look at you know, in Santa Fe or something like that, material is very important because they have a particular style that is heavily reliant on the material of the buildings in that area. We have something similar on our square in downtown, where we have a pretty traditional form of architecture and traditional form of materials there. And so that's another thing to consider. If there are places within our community already that have a particular character, style, that is based on that place, that's something that we would want to do. So you would want to look at putting material standards that match that traditional style around that area. The other time where material standards become really important is when you're looking at larger use-based buildings. So not all of our zoning districts are based on scale. Some of them are just based on use, industrial use. It could be a small industrial, a big industrial, but it's just an industrial building. We still have use-based zoning in our code for those sorts of districts. And in those areas, material standards are important because you start to lose the form standards. We're putting in place, and we're being able to propose with CodeSMTX some much more enhanced articulation, which means requiring that buildings have awnings. The main way that we're doing that is through what's called our blank wall area standards. So we're saying that there's only a certain number of feet, vertically and horizontally, that you can have nothing on your wall, just a solid wall. So you need to have articulation. That means you know, changes in the building coming in and out, doors, windows. A substantial change in materials is another way that you can form that articulation. So a lot of times really well-designed buildings use a whole lot of different materials, and they move from piece to piece. So that's something we want to make sure that we're able to continue to do under the code. So those are some of the key considerations. What we're proposing is that in the area of traditional materials, looking at those downtown buildings and that place around downtown, we're proposing that buildings in the downtown district do have material standards that reflect that traditional style that's there. We're proposing enhanced building form and articulation standards for all buildings in those form-based districts. And we're proposing that larger buildings, so those higher intensity districts like your CD5, apartment buildings within your CD4, or other higher intensity uses all have those building material standards. So essentially we're able to sort of pick and choose a little bit more on a finer level of detail so that we can pick and choose both by the zoning district level as well as the building type. So still all apartment buildings, regardless of what zoning district you're in, have 100%, are proposed to have 100% masonry. So that is it.
Have you had a question?
Yes.
So in the material standards discussion that we had, the city council spent a significant amount of time. There was a council committee. The planning commission, I think, looked at it 2 or 3 times as well. And, you know, realizing that no one could predict every single building and every single building proposal, we left in the ability for variance, I guess we call it a warrant, whatever the legal term was. And we just recently granted one because we felt it met the intent of the standards that we had proposed. But in those discussions, one of the things that came up was, and I won't use the name of it, but it's a local gas station that has a lot of them around here. And there's one right in the middle of the neighborhood. It's most of the neighborhoods that we have, or the older neighborhoods, are typically wood frame housing. But in Victory Gardens, for instance, a lot of those newer homes are not predominantly, but a good portion of them are brick, and they're really nice. But the standards that we came up with were commercial, but there's no way you could match that gas station, which has been there forever. They did a complete renovation, for the most part, to the neighborhood. And I would much rather have it look somewhat close to a neighborhood than a lot of, you know, colorful metal and things like that. So my question is, since we didn't put material standards for residential, and I understand you're trying to work that through for the neighborhood district, the different districts, are you going to try to change what we all just spent a lot of time creating already on the commercial end? That's the question. Are you going to, is your intent to change what the commission looked at 2 or 3 times, with the council committee, the workshop we had, the votes that we took? Are you going to change it?
So the places that are being proposed to change that are in that smaller scale. So for example,
just the smaller scale.
Just the small scale stuff. Yes. So that.
Along Hopkins Street, maybe that kind of stuff. Is that what you're talking about? Small scale.
Yes. Yeah. Not necessarily. I mean.
The neighborhood, or, you know,
right.
Between Bishop and Old Rancho 12.
Right. But all of your commercial zones, anything that's along your highways. All of that still retains that same material standards, those same material standards.
Thank you.
So I get a bunch of notes. Again, you know what the question is. What do you want the new code to do to address this topic? I grab a bunch of these. Okay. Need to determine what the material standards are for mixed use, MF versus commercial. Does too much or depth take away from necessary square footage from developer that may be needed for affordability to both developer down to tenant? a question about articulation and the definition of
That
it?
was what that question was.
Oh, I misspoke. Okay.
So the question was, I've had the question posed to me with articulation. The question was posed to me with the articulation too much or too much in depth of articulation. Does it take away from the square footage that would be possibly necessary in order for affordability as not developer to tenant?
Is city, not sure about this one, going to be required to follow code SMTX? Yeah, what is
No.
Right. Okay. Define and develop style standards for character districts. Have material standards in transition zones fit the zones, i.e. Gamblies? Gumbies, thank you. Between my vision and the fact that I don't live in San Marcos, struggling. Fully agree with complaints, prevents creativity and does not correlate with charm. Okay. Barrier for local business owners and favors national chains supporting changes proposed. Must protect historical heritage areas, allow wood or wood-type products. Does this code prevent, underlined, an all-metal building in traditional neighborhoods?
Thank you.
Multifamily already have material standards that are in place. And P&Z and Council has recently passed a commercial material ordinance. Why not incorporate it into CodeSMTX? Last one, define size of smaller commercial developments that could have an alternative material standard. Ooh, you guys have a lot on that one, okay. All right, so, yeah, question, yeah.
I just wanted to clarify, Mayor.
Close to your mouth.
Okay, Mayor, your question was previously, are we planning to change the code? And obviously, what we're looking at is just looking at some scale and some walkability types of things for smaller. But that's what we've heard from the community, as well as some best practices. But the council and yourself will have the ability to set the policy for this code. So I just wanted to remind the P&Z and the council that everything that is in here is definitely up for discussion.
Thank you.
So we've got the big buckets of existing multifamily standards,
Wood, brick, and rock.
small business. Oh, multifamily. Yeah, existing multifamily standards. Storage. Does anything jump out to anybody that they hadn't heard get up there? So is there any other kind of material standards related comment that occurs to you that you'd like to see raised?
One of the questions that was up there was about metal buildings, and so one of the things that we have proposed is that across all districts, just metal sheet siding we're proposing that as a prohibited material, so that you could get a CUP similar to how you can now through our code for commercial development, but just expanding that throughout to all districts, that a 100% metal sheet siding building would be a prohibited thing without a conditional use permit. Yes, ma'am.
So are your material standards then as well applying to residential based on just because it's a district?
It's applying based on the residential standard, the material standards apply based on districts and building types. Yes.
Does it propose, because we exempted residential from any of those
That's right, yeah.
material standard discussions. It was strictly focused on commercial.
That's right. One of the things that we heard throughout was the issue of a 100% metal building in a single-family residential neighborhood. So one of the things that we did is we identified prohibited materials. That is a proposed solution, is to have the only kinds of material standards is that 100% metal sheet siding is a prohibited material anywhere.
So, just so I understand correctly, that in neighborhood districts, residential single-family homes, as it's being proposed now, would have material standards applied, correct?
The only thing that would be applicable would be that 100% sheet metal siding is prohibited. That's the only thing applicable.
Hold on, Ms. Houston.
So 90% would be allowed?
I'm not exactly sure what the total details on the I think it's just considered I think it just says it's a prohibited material, is metal sheet siding.
Look at that later.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so the answer was no to the building material, saying the rules, they do not apply to the residential, and the only thing you're saying is there's no metal buildings in the neighborhood.
Yes, sir. Just, yes. So reiterating, just so everybody can hear, the only thing we're saying is that there's no metal buildings for the main structure in neighborhoods.
Yeah,
Doing good. So just to recap, we've got 5 big buckets here. Existing multifamily/commercial standards, comments and suggestions there. Character districts versus transition zones. Small business, historic materials, standards versus creativity and city compliance. So those are the kind of big themes that you all want the staff team to look at with regard to materials. Okay? Any other?
Seems like there's a lot of
CDs?
interpretation there.
So we're going to keep going.
Okay, affordable housing. This is the last one. We have added in this revised draft of the code, one of the big comments that we heard was that we were not, in the public draft of the code that went out, we mainly addressed affordable housing from the perspective of providing housing that is affordable. So what that means there is that we're not talking about introducing, we weren't at that time talking about introducing development incentives to have actual affordable housing that has like a period of affordability where it can only be sold for a certain amount for a period of time. We really focused a lot of the code on are we able to provide housing that is affordable? So smaller lot stuff, some different options within those character districts and those preferred development areas particularly. One of the things that we focused on for most is providing affordable options that are available for home ownership. So that's the thing that our affordable housing focuses on for the most part, is affordable opportunities for home ownership. So what we heard in summary is that garden court housing, one of the concerns is that when you look at these diverse housing types is how do we balance that? How do we balance the diverse housing types and more affordable housing with making sure that those options are available for residents and don't become student housing or mainly housing for students. So that was a big concern. That's something that we really worked on throughout the process and spent a lot of time doing, is trying to make sure that we can provide in appropriate places some smaller lot, more affordable housing that is available for residents and doesn't just become all student housing. Some of the ways that you can do that is by making sure that that housing is interspersed. So we have requirements for integrating affordable housing so that you don't have whole areas that are one type of housing that is more affordable, because when you put a whole bunch of that in one area, that can start to really become a problem. So making sure that affordable opportunities are smaller scale, that they're interspersed within neighborhoods or within developments. Looking at one of the biggest things, biggest conversations. Affordable housing is a big topic. It's something that we're not going to solve affordable housing in San Marcos with CodeSMTX, but we're going to try to make efforts to get there, make efforts to make sure that there is an opportunity and a way that we can provide housing that is affordable. One of the biggest things to look at is housing demand. So if we aren't providing enough housing to take care of the number of people that are moving here, naturally housing costs go up. More and more people are looking for housing that doesn't exist. That's something that I think we have seen in this community over the last several years. We've been named the fastest growing city in the nation. We have a lot of people moving here, and making sure that we're putting enough units on the ground to accommodate the people that are moving here is a big factor in affordable housing. So that's one thing that the way that we're looking at trying to address that is by having these preferred development areas in our comprehensive plan. Our comprehensive plan talks about that. It says we need to provide enough places for all of these people that are moving here and have areas that are pre-entitled, ready to build, so that people can build that housing that's needed to support the people moving here. So that's what those preferred development areas are. We've really worked on the codes in those areas, in those character districts, to make sure that they support the smaller scale, diverse type of housing, so that we're not getting really large, big scale projects, but that we are getting some of that smaller, more diverse housing to go into those areas to accommodate that need. So that's one of the biggest things that we're looking at and that we're focusing on in terms of trying to make sure that housing remains affordable for residents that live here in San Marcos. We have included in this revised draft, we have included a few development incentives that the council and the community have talked about. Things like density bonuses, those are included in our affordable housing policy as well. We've also looked at parking reductions for when truly affordable housing is offered, affordable housing that's offered for a period of time. And again, these are predominantly opportunities for home ownership type of housing. Parking, setbacks, lot sizes, anything that starts to take away and put barriers towards the buildable area on our lot, those are the kinds of things that you can really look at adjusting to making sure that you're able to provide housing that is affordable. So those are the types of things. Again, most of this is focused in the intensity zones, in those character districts, the preferred development areas, because those are the areas where we're not having to be really careful to match an existing character. So we can be a little bit more flexible with lot sizes and things like that. So those are the three, and the third incentive that you'll see in the code is for additional stories. So that one's that's not a by right type of incentive. That's one that development incentive. That's one that if somebody is asking for additional stories, that one of the criteria that should be looked at is that they are providing affordable housing options. So and that's something that the council has discussed as well. And so that's all I've got. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay, yes, thank you. It's getting late. Integrating housing, that's one of the strategies. The way that we're doing that, we do have requirements or criteria in there for location efficient areas. That's something that's mentioned in the affordable housing policy. So what that means is that we want to make sure that housing is provided in a place that is close to services, and those intensity zones are a good way to measure that. Those are the places that are supposed to be high density, walkable, mixed use areas. So those are good places for affordable housing. Again, we are requiring proportional dispersal of units. So if there is a larger development that's adding affordable housing, we want to make sure that there are requirements in place to make sure that that housing is dispersed throughout the development instead of all in one area. We have we're limiting affordable housing to ownership opportunities, particularly within existing neighborhoods, and incorporating again that rental registration as a way to make sure that we're managing maintenance and standards and upkeep, and then the incentives that I already talked about.
See, lots of stickies, so that's great. So again, the question, what do you want to see the new code do to address this topic? Can you offer parking incentives and still keep cars off streets in residential neighborhoods? How can you keep student housing costs and allowances from inflating the overall housing costs? How will you encourage buy-in by developers to make affordable housing affordable? Is that right? How do we ensure affordable options actually become affordable housing to residents? When affordable housing is approved, limits on renting to students is prohibited / discouraged near or in single-family neighborhoods. Okay. Provide a distinction between affordable versus workforce housing. Define who will enforce affordability provisions. Must target 30 to 40% of median income, not 80%. 80% of median income is a typical renter, not available housing for 30 to 40%ers. Parking reduction bonuses should be within a quarter mile of public transportation. 10 to 20% of units is too low for density bonuses. Aim for 20 to 30 to 40%. Bus routes should be within a quarter mile of affordable workforce housing. Walk shed considered to be a quarter mile, and ridership drops off significantly after that. These are all on the kind of walk shed, how far. That one. Must increase by a lot purpose, build student housing in appropriate zones to take the pressure off of other zones. Oh, this is good. There's a typo on 4.3.4.5. What's going on with points 1 and 2?
Thank you, Jane.
You got called out.
Says it wasn't
Wasn't hurt. Need to review the bonuses / incentives. These are too much for too little return. Focus on single family or smaller scale affordable housing types rather than big multifamily projects. How to convince, I'm not getting this one, university? Yeah, university
to build more
housing on campus. Okay. All right. Ken, let's see.
They're running out of room, aren't
Those
they?
are all, yeah.
Yeah, they're running out of room.
This is daunting. All right. Saved all our time for this topic. Can the smaller scale housing type be requested in existing neighborhoods, and if so, how will this happen? Find a strategy to build missing middle homes for owner-occupied use. Right. Can we designate student housing districts that are townhouse-style condos so we can keep neighborhoods more non-student-oriented ownership? If at any point you want to jump up and address any of these, I'll give you my mic, grab the other one, so, because there's a lot here. Don't draw folks to SMTX with our affordable housing limits so we take care of current residents. If incentives like parking are given, ensure that it fits with the larger parking plan. Section on parking. How to limit ownership. Great idea. How to enforce. Does CodeSMTX encourage lower income populations to move to San Marcos? Parking reduction by CUP only until culture change. Find a strategy to encourage townhome style development that's affordable and owner occupied. How do you limit affordable housing to ownership within neighborhoods? Okay, we're getting a lot of the same themes. So allow for smaller square foot housing without driveways, increase affordability and infill options. So we've got a lot of concerns expressed, right? How do you do this stuff? How do you deal with this home ownership versus rental? We've got some specific suggestions for some strategies to address specific styles of development, parking constraints, et cetera, for increasing the odds of affordability, issues around parking standards, and how to create that balance without pushing parking into neighborhoods. We've got issues on enforcement that have come up, how to deal with zoning and affordable housing. So, student housing, transportation, affordability, and the incentives. And then parking, I mentioned, enforcement, and zoning. So there's a lot there. So I don't know if any of y'all want to kind of reflect on the meta themes you're hearing and try to kind of surface some of that.
We'll have to go through these, but some of them are going to be in your affordable housing policy, and then some of them are directly related to the code. So some of the strategies that we've talked about here, or that we want to develop, might be in a different venue versus how we can get a strategy to get these types of affordable housing into our developments.
Also, the council subcommittee on affordable housing is meeting regularly now, and we'll have some suggestions on our first step of questions that the council asked us to make recommendations on, but we'll have additional affordable housing discussions with all the staff for a deeper dive into some of these same issues. So maybe they'll be done in time.
Complex topic. So, you know, what happened here tonight is you kind of raise some of the tensions and the trade-offs, like how are we going to do these things? Some are be policy issues, some actually would be addressed in the code. So, if y'all don't have further comments for this portion.
I have a question, comment. Somebody here in the audience brought up something really interesting. Can you do neighborhood districts that would be student-oriented neighborhood districts, where it could be like townhomes and condos, which could potentially open up the market again in neighborhoods? So when the parents are coming and wanting to invest in buying property, that we would actually have a place that they can do that holistically, as opposed to going into the neighborhoods and buying them. So could you have student purpose housing districts that wouldn't be multifamily rentals, but more townhome condo ownership, where they would flip every 4 years and they would be kept up really
Yeah,
nice,
right there.
as opposed to some that we have now that are, you know, one person owns 20 units and they kind of sit there for 20 years.
Yeah, yes. I mean, yes, you certainly can. And a lot of what our comprehensive plan talks about is finding locations for student housing that is appropriate and in mechanisms and ways that it's appropriate. The comprehensive plan talks about, and a lot of when we were going through that process, which you're familiar with, being on the committee, is just that that was a big concern. That was something that we were talking about through that comprehensive plan process. And when people were identifying those intensity zones, they were thinking these are areas where we can release some of the tension of student housing in our existing neighborhoods by providing these places for that student housing to go. And by providing more appropriate types of housing that can be owner-occupied versus, you know, and they could be occupied by anybody, right? It doesn't have to be students, but can be students. I think that's a really good option, and I think it's something that's been talked about in the comprehensive plan.
But when will we actually identify those? Because we have been talking about it for 4 or 5 years now. So what point in this process do we say, okay, we're going to identify this corridor for student housing or for student housing if it's not multifamily, something more lower intensity?
Well, what CodeSMTX is doing is it's proposing different standards for intensity zones and character districts. So those character districts, we aren't proposing occupancy restrictions, and we aren't proposing those other types of mechanisms that we currently use in existing neighborhoods to protect against having students and student operated. So that is what we're doing. Part of what we're doing with CodeSMTX is saying these areas, you know, we're going to have a lot of single family, mixed type of housing, townhouses, duplexes, some of those housing types. We're encouraging those, and we're not putting in place those things that make it difficult for students or for parents to purchase and have those properties for their students.
We'll go to Mr. Gregson, then we'll go to Ms. McCarty, and then.
Abby, you just said in character districts, we're not going to have occupancy restrictions? That's the proposal now? So
That's right.
The current 2 family unrelated per household, there wouldn't be an occupancy restriction, it would be unlimited?
That's right. Those are not proposed in intensity zone or character districts. Those areas were identified on the comprehensive plan as not being in or adjacent to existing neighborhoods, and so those occupancy, yes.
Okay. Yeah, but I guess the distinction I see is that there's affordable housing, you tried to mention this earlier, there's affordable housing and there's workforce housing. And the thing with workforce housing, if it's at that income level or that cost or below, it has a tendency to become rental properties for students. And I think the issue here, particularly in and near our residential neighborhoods, the concern is to make some type of restriction on rental that would basically say the owner is the occupant is the tenant, 5 years of credit history. There has to be one person in the unit that has a job that's sufficient to pay the rent. Those types of things limit the ability of students to be able to rent in those areas. And I think that might be an applicable application in certain characters or neighborhood districts or other areas that we could use that type of requirement or restriction to limit the ability of students to occupy in those type of homes. Because otherwise, they will become, if they're in that category of number or below, they will become student-occupied housing.
Ms. McCarty.
Nope, sir.
I had a 2-part question that Councilman Gregson is partially taken care of, but the other part goes back to Councilwoman Pruitt, and I'm wondering, it seems to me that the idea of an area that would be developed for student-occupied, parent-owned condos would be a really good idea. The only way I could see that ever happening would be for some incentives for a developer to create such a place, and the city would give incentives for that developer to create such a place, and then the parents would, they would market it to parents. We'd have to know at that point how many parents are really buying houses. It looks from those numbers of the 70% or whatever like a lot are, and it would be a very attractive thing, but the city should find a way to go after what those numbers are in order to help encourage business to want to fill that niche. And I don't know if this is the right place for that, but that is really intriguing to me.
Okay, I'm going to continue on with the thread of the student housing districts, and this is something that I thought of a long time ago that I still think is worth consideration, is in order to make those areas more attractive, is there any way we could reach out to the university and ask them if they could provide some of the restaurants, coffee shops, and such that take Bobcat bucks in those areas, so that the students would feel, somewhat connected, so they didn't have to make so many trips into town, that we would create areas where they could get what they could get on campus other than being in class. Right. So I just wanted to throw that out and see if there might be a possibility of talking to them about it and trying to come up with an area like that where the parents, instead of buying 6 houses on my block, they could buy something across town.
Great.
I need to make sure that I understand this, because I put the question up there earlier. You're talking about no occupancy restrictions in any CD? None of them?
Yes, ma'am. So CD is only allowed in intensity zones on the comprehensive plan.
However,
And
complaints
let me.
that we get over and over again as council members is, and there are many quiet students that people are fine sitting next to. But there are some that are noisy and have other habits that are not
We'll
conducive
get you
to
average per
regular
square foot.
single-family neighborhood. So if we want people living
It's like
in
250, it's
these
300 per square
character
feet.
districts that are
It's about
workforce,
300
I'm
square feet
assuming this
with,
is young couples, perhaps starter homes, first homes, et cetera, why would we not have the occupancy restrictions in the CDs? And I like the idea of a student-oriented district that allows parents or whomever to buy those homes, invest in those homes, do what they're doing now, but put it all in one place as much as possible. Why are we not looking at occupancy restrictions in character districts? Even though it's an intensity zone, I get that.
I apologize and I misspoke. Occupancy restrictions do exist in the CD3, so in those that are intended to be more single-family oriented in the intensity zones. But once you move into that more medium density, which is CD4 is intended for things like townhouses, small apartment buildings, those sorts of developments. And when you get into there, the occupancy restrictions don't exist. And that's actually similar to our current code, where I think in townhouses, we have some duplex districts where occupancies don't exist. So that medium density, the occupancy restrictions don't exist. In CodeSMTX in the neighborhood districts, we're actually proposing to increase the occupancy restrictions to apply to all development in existing neighborhoods. So expands in existing neighborhoods and is less in intensity zones.
That's helpful. I think if you could send us something on that and the page that says it's restricted on CD3, because I missed that. I didn't see it.
Yep.
Just when I asked the question.
Yes.
So I think that's going to be very important to a lot of people regarding adoption of this new code and doing away with the one we have. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I just want to bring one thing up. I would urge caution on a area that is predominantly or all student housing. I mean, we have designated an intensity zone along Thorpe Lane that is, for the most part, designated for very dense student housing from Hopkins Street to Ocarina Springs Drive. But I've lived in other communities, especially other university communities, where an idea was put forward to not to segregate, but to congregate a whole group of, and the results are mixed. I think you ought to look at those before and provide the council and the commission with some results. Properties get run down very quickly. There's always a fight about where should that development be, if it's 15 or 20 or 30 acres. It's oftentimes put farther out, and so it requires a need to drive to campus rather than, so I get it, I understand that, and I love what we've done with Thorpe Lane. That was a perfect suggestion. But I'd like to see a little bit more research done on the rest of it. Who was, Ms. Rand?
I'm very concerned about the tension between having party students in particular sort of feeling like they're cannibalizing the neighborhood and having that completely prevent us from providing affordable housing to the low-income residents. And I wonder if there's not room to have a companion designation to purpose-built student housing as something like purpose-built family housing, which is not forced, that is not restrictive. Anyone's available, anyone can live, students can live there, but there's so many cues that this is a quiet area. There's playgrounds, it's plugged into community services and Head Start and different things that make it swamped with visual and social cues that this is fine for a quiet student and completely inappropriate for a spring break zone. Without being political.
I'm just gonna throw one more comment on about affordable housing, and it kind of goes back to that workshop that we had late last year. All affordable housing, whether it's in a big box subsidized by the federal government or the state through the Texas Department of Housing Credit or whatever that is, or smaller base, smaller, more neighborhood style it's all subsidized by someone else. There's always something that makes it affordable, and that's fine. Whether, you know, in Austin they're issuing bonds, right, from time to time to create more affordable housing, and that's fine. But I think we should recognize that somewhere in the code that is the reality, that it's made affordable through additional subsidies.
I remember when they made the point during the workshop on affordable housing, and I was in the audience, I couldn't say anything, but I felt like it really missed the role of supply in that equation, and that it only needs to be subsidized when it's unaffordable, which is there's a serious supply and demand problem, in that if we had a lot more supply and prices were down, it would require much less of a subsidy mechanism in place. And I had two thoughts.
What houses they can't afford to pay to.
The other one will come back to me. But I was not completely convinced by that assertion that all affordable housing requires a subsidy somewhere along the line buried several layers down.
Okay.
I just would like to make 2 points. One is, if you think about it, in effect, all housing is subsidized. My memory is that the single-family housing neighborhoods don't pay for themselves in terms of all the city services that are required for them. But who wants to live in a community that only has factories and apartments? So there's something good about having single-family neighborhoods that makes it very attractive to have. Number 2, I would just like to ask all of us to ask yourself, how important is it to have a range of housing for a range of people with a range of incomes? I mean, we know we have a range of income in San Marcos, but what is the kind of housing that a lot of these people are in and can afford? Is it in the public interest to be doing something to provide more affordable housing, which could benefit the entire community? Different cities have decided, and they've used different mechanisms, that decent housing is a public good, even if there's single families living in them. Because housing seems to translate into so many different pathologies if it's not any good. And so let's ask ourselves, are we going to pay now or pay later, and just have a very serious conversation?
Just a reminder too that affordable housing is much bigger than us talking about what we can do in the code. It's really the ability to afford a home. So there's only going to be so much that we can do within this code, and I think we continuously need to be very conscientious that we're not talking about subsidizing as we do this, because as we all know, our governments can't continue that subsidizing and still stay able to maintain streets and infrastructure. So I think lot sizes is what we're looking at, and how do we make that affordable? But I think the discussion is much bigger than what we can even comprehend through this code, and the ability to afford should really be the main topic when we're talking about affordable housing.
The only concern I have is I'm all for affordable homes, but I just don't want to attract outsiders to come to San Marcos. I believe in taking care of our residents, but I don't want to have it where there's people from Austin or San Antonio coming to San Marcos just because we have affordable homes here now. We just got to be real careful with this.
And I'll just add that Dr. Mahofnan made a great point, and I agree with him fully. I do see the value in it. And I guess maybe it's our terminology, because all I was talking about was homes that cost less than market on purpose. That maybe we need to work on our terms. Does anybody else have any comments or questions about affordable housing or any of the strategies that we've been discussing in this section? Okay. So go ahead, and you can finish us off if we're near completion.
Okay, so we have, we've made it to the last slide. Next steps, basically we've got another workshop that's coming up on February 8th. We'll be talking about the big topic there is the environment. There are a couple of other things thrown in there just because they needed to be discussed, but for the majority of the meeting we'll be talking about the new the new water quality and drainage requirements. After that, we will be producing, so this is the revised draft of the code. It's not the final draft. So we will be looking at producing a final draft of the code, and that's what will start moving through the approval process. So we'll check back in with the council and the Planning Commission at this next workshop on the February 8th, and check back in terms of the next steps moving from there. But thank you, everybody.
Okay, council and commissioners, before we adjourn. Hold on. Before we adjourn, we will have our question and answer session with the press and public. If you have a question on this agenda or this discussion, please approach that podium up there. State your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes for your questions to be asked and answered. Whoever's ready. Okay.
Hi, y'all. Whoops, where is it? Which is the mic? This one? Hi, y'all. Lisa Marie Coppola, San Marcos News Live. Someone made a great suggestion about affluent fees, and I don't know which one of y'all did, but I've written letters to the editor, I've sent emails, I've done video blogs, and I've asked for affluent fees, and so I'm wondering why that never hit the code.
Affluent fees. I don't know what she's talking about.
Could you state that? What's the term again? Sorry.
Affluent fees?
Fluid fees?
Affluent fees.
Affluent,
Tax
sorry.
and corporations that pollute. Someone asked that question.
Does anybody has that been addressed?
Have we not considered taxing people who pollute, like making that like a stipulation? I know some.
Oh, you're talking about environmental, somebody brought up environmental,
yeah.
No.
I'm talking about a new code. I'm not talking about pre-existing regulations. We're going through a whole rewrite process.
That was my sticky note.
Was that yours? That was brilliant.
Well, there's just there's a bit in there about code violations, and it targets a couple areas. So it's inserting environmental regulations and strengthening the language.
So what happened to the tree board? Because one of the pieces of language that you guys have here at the top is going to key considerations of other cities. And I know I'm not the only person in San Marcos who's asked for a tree board. Can we not put that on the table?
I do not believe there is a tree board in this draft. Is that correct?
So can we not put it in the draft? Because I know there's other citizens who have expressed interest about that.
I mean, it's not there yet. The product is not final, so.
Can we put it in the draft?
I don't think we're.
I mean, people have been asking for a year now for that tree board, and you guys are literally saying key considerations of other cities. We do back-in parking, we do all these other things the city of Austin does. Why can't we have a simple tree board?
I'm not sure a tree board is the only strategy that we're proposing to use for tree preservation.
I'm well aware of all the tree preservation, Mayor. I've talked to these wonderful staff people. They work very hard on this. And I'm convinced that we need a tree board. So I'm asking now, can we put that on the table?
So did a tree board, was that discussed at the think tank process?
We did discuss tree preservation, and we do have some new enhanced standards that are proposed as part of CodeSMTX for the protection of trees.
Was there a discussion of a tree board?
That came in as comments. It was discussed.
But it didn't make it.
And it did not make it into the revised draft.
So that's what it's at right now.
Yes, sir.
Now, thank you, Ms. Coppola. Is there any other questions or answers with the press? Anybody? Okay.
John, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Okay,
But
I'm sorry.
Before you do, I'm gonna send this down to Ms. Houston. I apologize. I jumped into question and answers prior to hearing the request to speak.
Better late than never. When we first started talking about the code, we talked about having some work groups.
Listen.
And I would request that we do that because there's a lot of detail. I've got sticky notes on page after page after page. Some of them are just notations where something seems out of sequence. It's not substantive change. But I've got a lot of questions that I think for everyone here. I would like to take, bless their heart, some more staff time, but it seems like it might be more beneficial if not each of us do it individually. They can be posted meetings, that's fine. I still think we need those work group sessions for those who want to go, that we had asked for and that we were told what happened. That's my question.
And I second that. I think that'd be a great idea.
Ms. Derrick?
Actually, that was kind of where I was headed too, that the final draft seems to be coming up really, really fast, and I don't think that anyone here can say they completely grasp the code right now. I'd be surprised if anyone does. So I just want to ask for maybe some more meetings or some suggestions about how we get to the final draft.
Mr. Garber?
I agree. I think we made a lot of progress tonight, but we need another one of these. Maybe break it up into smaller groups or whatever to iron out some of the details that have yet to be revealed. So I think we need another one on these same topics.
Yeah, is anyone in favor of, doing another one on these before we move on to the next group of stuff?
Well, we have another one. We have another joint workshop coming up.
But it's all different topics.
Right. You want to have another workshop on this topic, all set of the
They
same
may not be
topics?
able to do a draft in time. So we should stay on schedule with the next set of topics.
Okay, stay on schedule, I guess, but maybe do another.
So I think what Ms. Houston was recommending is that we stay on schedule maybe, but then we have opportunities with staff that we might offer 2 hours on Tuesday, Thursday. Whoever wants to go can go to these work sessions and we can just ask questions, and if more of us are there, we'll pick up more from other people. And it's not mandatory, but it's as an option, because some of us have been on the think tank for 2 years and might not have those questions, but some of us are, just opening that book up a couple months ago and being a bit overwhelmed, so.
And what's going to happen to the stickies? Besides a report coming back to us, is any of this going to change what's in the draft code?
Well, it sounds to me, what I'm hearing is that there's an interest in providing, similar to what we've done before, where we did a kind of a lunch and learn session. We could post that as both the council and the commissioners together for those that would like to attend and maybe do a deeper dive in some of these issues. I don't see any issue by doing that. You just have to work with the calendar and the staff as well. I was also, I think it was a suggestion in our pre-meeting that if you have specific questions, suggestions, opinions, that it would be great if we could get those in writing to Ms. Mattingly, to Ms. Jameson, or Abby, so that those could be documented, answered, and then distributed to all the people sitting at this table, so that everyone would know every question that's being asked, and I think that would be quite helpful as well. So maybe between those three strategies, everybody could get what they need to feel comfortable to know that we are proceeding in the right direction and that we're going to end up with the code that we all want to have to the fullest extent possible. Is there any other suggestions or comments before we adjourn for the evening? Well, again, thank you all, and thank you to the citizens who stayed and paid attention to all this detail. And we'll see you commissioners and council again on February 8th. And we are adjourned our business at 8:17. Thank you.